Hey guys, just thought I would come on and do a video. It's been a long time. I've done maybe one video in 2 or 3 months. My videos always tend to go too long. And I usually pick an artist and then do a book-length lecture on them. And, it takes a lot of work. And takes a lot of patience of people to listen. And I had caught somebody in the VC, somebody that's new to me, actually. I can't even recall who it is, who has a pretty good idea. This person, well, I don't even know if I could find them now. If I tried, I'll probably come across them at some future point. Basically does a video once a week of what they've been listening to, that current week. I thought that was a great idea. And something that, wouldn't lead to a 90-minute video or, an extensive 3 days of research before I did a video. And I've been pulling out a lot of stuff. I do a lot of listening based on the fact that my car has a CD stereo player that plays MP3s on discs, on CDRs, which is nice, like this. And depending on how much you crunch the MP3 files, I get about 8.5 hours on a disc of music. And generally what I do, almost all the time, is all of the discs that I have, and I've got maybe 100 now, and I'm always making more. Generally, the ones I make for myself only feature one artist. So obviously it's somebody I have a lot of albums by, because I'll have 8.5 hours of their material. And it's not even just any 8.5 hours. It's usually just specifically favorite albums. So I only have one artist per one of these discs. So a lot of my listening is when I'm home, thinking of who I haven't done a disc by yet. And then I'll go into my library and start listening to all the albums I have by them, figuring out which ones I want to put on one of these discs. Now, once I get these discs made, I'll put one in. And while I'm not working now, I'm unemployed, so I don't do a lot of driving. But it takes me more than a month to go through one of these discs, so it's 8.5 hours of music. So in the course of a month right now, I'm not anywhere near driving 8.5 hours. I may do about 6 hours a month, it seems. I'm getting about 2/3 the way through in the course of a month. It might take me like 6 weeks maybe to go through an entire 8.5 hour disc. So a lot of the listening I do at home is me thinking of what artists I would like to listen to that I don't have one of these discs in my car of, and then just playing all these albums by them in a row to try to decipher which ones I want to create on this disc. But apart from that, like every other normal person, most of my other listening consists of whatever I feel like listening to at the moment, or recent purchases. I'm still buying stuff. I shouldn't be. I'm unemployed. I have no money. But when a sale happens, or I see a disc at a good price, or something just really piques my interest, I far too often go for it. So, a lot of my listening is recent acquisitions. I usually pick up 1 or 2 at a time. And this week I got a few, and these are pretty wide-ranging things. One doesn't have anything to do with the other. I had this order of 3 CDs, and I simply chose a couple of them because they were either very cheap or not that easy to obtain, and I got a real good price on all of them. New, but found a site online that had sale. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are going to know, this is the most commercial thing that I've been listening to, is Eric Gale, who was a kind of like a precursor to the smooth jazz thing. You know, he started recording in the 70s as a leader, but he was a studio musician. Played a lot with guys like Bob James in the early days, which, you know, the early Bob James kind of funky stuff from the early 70s will give you an idea of the type of music he did. He's a guitarist, passed away a number of years ago now. And he recorded, 15 or 20 solo albums as a leader, but really made most of his living as a studio musician. So he was apparently a very good sight reader, and did a lot of sessions for music. I did a lot of sessions for people like Bob James, but I think he did a lot of people like R&B singers, backing them up, probably live as well, certainly in the studio. He did, reggae gigs. How to describe his style? He's got a jazz and blues tinge to his guitar playing. Very clean sound. Not a real bebopper in terms of jazz. More of an early precursor to the smoother jazz guys, like I guess like Larry Carlton or Lee Ritenour, kind of, with a very clean guitar mode. He played a hollow body guitar. He did a lot of reggae kind of gigs, and he kind of retained a lot of reggae influence in his own albums. He didn't write a whole lot. Most of the albums are covers or tunes other people wrote for him, and a lot of people would think his albums are overproduced, and there's a lot of strings on them and horn sections and all that. Enormous bands backing him up, even rhythm guitarists and stuff. So it's not a lot of people's kind of cup of tea. And I had on vinyl, because I was buying his stuff in the early 80s, I probably have 8 or 9 or 10 albums of his on vinyl. And up until now, I only had one CD that was a double album. His albums are short, so actually 2 of them fit onto one CD. And it was an album of his from the 70s, 2 albums packaged together on the 70s, called Ginseng Woman was one of them, which is a fairly popular album for him in about 1977. That one came out. And that's the only one I had for a long time, and this site had a real good sale on, and there was an album on here. This is another twofer. It's one disc, 2 short albums. Albums are each like 37 minutes long, so another example of them squeezing 2 albums onto a disc, which is nice. This is about 81, 83 period, so slightly, I think the one from 83 was actually the last one I had by him. Called Island Breeze. And again, there's a lot of people wouldn't like this because it's overproduced and all that, but I have quite a bunch of smooth jazz. It's not my favorite genre, but oddly enough, as much as I like smaller groups in other formats of jazz, and even in smooth jazz to a certain extent, I also, in recent years, have gained an appreciation for things like easy listening music, because of the orchestrations in easy listening music. And a lot of people don't like the more orchestrated smooth jazz stuff because it kind of butts up against almost being easy listening at times. But I've really gained an appreciation for the arrangements written for these tunes. The horn sections, the string sections are incredible. I mean, there could be 25, 30 musicians playing on one track. Highly arranged stuff. And you would never see them do this stuff live, with a band that big. I don't even know if he went out and toured solo. If he did, he probably had a 5 or 6 piece band at best. Because I've really gained an appreciation for the arrangements, not just the playing, but if the arrangements are good and you like a player, like I like his very clean guitar sound. A lot of people are iffy about stuff like this, and if they like smooth jazz, they like it from a later period, 80s, 90s or so. But just something about, and there's definitely faults on these albums. There's no doubt about it. There was definitely there's liner notes in one of these in this particular package that alludes to the fact that there was record company pressure to include some vocal tunes, which are always, to me, the pits. Those are always the worst tracks on the albums. Some kind of R&B-ish, funky kind of, vocal tunes. So now all of a sudden nobody's playing because somebody's singing, And if you're lucky, there's a little guitar solo in there. Well, that's kind of not what I'm into. I really want the stuff to be instrumental. But, so that happens here and there. There's like 13 tracks on the CD between the two albums, and I think there's 3 or 4 vocal tunes, which would be the ones that I would always play last when I rearrange the running order. But the rest of the stuff is there. And actually, that's something that's even carried over into the more recent smooth jazz stuff. A lot of these albums, that by instrumental bands, you'll have the 1 or 2 vocal tracks on there, which are obviously generally being forced on them by the record company to try to make hits. And that goes all the way back to Grover Washington Jr. to any number of people. Doing it even foreplay in more recent history. Who else? Everybody that does smooth jazz, I think, has stuck some vocal tracks on their albums, which I'm not crazy about. But it was nice because, and I went nuts because that first Eric Gale 2-for CD that I had, I bought many years ago, and I didn't have it loaded in my computer, which is where I listen to all my music from. And I hadn't heard it for 5, 6, 7 years, maybe longer. And it took me 3 days to find that CD in it, because, forget it, I could have 20 CDs by an artist, and they're all together somewhere, but I don't know where they are. And I have so many bins full of CDs that I can't find them. So I knew it was going to be a search to find the one Eric Gale prior CD that I had. And it did. It took me 3 or 4 days to find it. And I thought I looked everywhere, and I gave up looking, and then I found it. So, Eric Gale. Here's a guy that I've been listening to a bunch lately, and I might do a not a career retrospective so much overview of him, but maybe talk about him a bit more. And that's a guitarist named, I believe he's Swiss, from Switzerland, Christy Doran, best known probably for being in this jazz group, 4-piece jazz group, upright bass, drums, saxophone, and guitar. And Christy Doran's actually, in recent years, been making a living as a music teacher in a college somewhere. I want to say in Switzerland, but I'm not sure. But he's been putting out a lot of albums. And I get these periods where I want to listen to him for whatever reason. I don't even know why. He's made a lot of albums I don't like. He's one of these people, I don't know if people in the VC maybe understand this. You have artists that sometimes that you follow, even though you're not. There's a lot of stuff that they do that you don't like, but for some reason you find them interesting. And maybe it's sometimes they do something that clicks with you. And so you go searching for stuff like that. And Christy Doran is like that for me. I bought a different album on Japo Records back around 79 or 80. And I thought it was an interesting group. Didn't get anything else by them for years until the CD age came around. And then started picking up some solo albums by Christy Doran. And he's got the most prolific thing that he's done. He has this rock band with a vocalist and everything. And it plays kind of avant-garde rock with vocalists. At one point, I think the band had a female vocalist and it had a male vocalist. And I have totally skipped over buying any of those albums. Thanks to YouTube, I found videos of this band. And they weren't necessarily videos, they were just people posting up songs from the albums, or the albums themselves. And you can listen to them. And boy, this is not my cup of tea. It's kind of it's heavy avant rock thing. but he's also done some very interesting things from solo performances. He's got this one solo album that I have by him, done in the studio. And for some reason, and this is one of those things that I'm interested in the guy because I can't quite figure him out. He did a solo album in the studio, just him and his guitars, but for some reason he doesn't do any overdubbing on it. So everything is live. So he's got some delay and some little looper things going on. And it sounds like what you would hear him do in a solo live performance. But I don't quite understand the thinking behind not doing overdubs in the studio. And then other projects he's had with kind of interesting bands. He had this one band that has I think it's a trio. I'm doing this from memory. And it's got a flute player and a drummer and him on guitars. I'm pretty sure that's it. Maybe I'll get into him a little bit more. That's a really good band. I think a lot of stuff they do is improvised. And then he's got his rock thing, and you never know what he's going to do. And I came across, following him and looking at his career, and I've been listening to his albums a bit lately. And I found this one. That's a duo album, fairly recent, 2013. And it's him on electric guitar. The only other musician is Yang Jin, this young, she looks fairly young woman who plays traditional Chinese stringed instruments. Now, you would have to love traditional Chinese stringed instruments to like this album, and I do. I am a big, big, big fan of Chinese and Japanese stringed instruments both. I love ethnic instruments in general, but the Chinese and Japanese ones in particular, like in Japan you got the koto, and in China you've got this, I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these. She plays two instruments. I don't know which one that is. She plays the pipa, which is P-I-P-A, which is generally, most of these instruments you don't play chords on, you play single notes. And if you've ever seen a movie that takes place in China where they have some Chinese ethnic type music in the background, you've probably heard the two instruments she uses. The other one, I don't know how you pronounce, Gugin, G-U-G-I-N. And I'm not sure what the difference is between the two instruments, and I actually have quite a few CDs of traditional Chinese music with both instruments, and I'm not sure I can tell the difference between the two. I'd have to do a side-by-side comparison. They're both stringed instruments. They may have a different number of strings. The tuning may be different, or the pitch, like one may be like a soprano instrument and another tenor instrument kind of thing. I'm not sure. But being a big fan of the sound of that, and I thought it was an interesting duet. And I heard, I don't know if it's Amazon, probably Amazon, the 30-second clips of the album. And it's just Christy Doran and Yang Jin in the studio, and again live, which irks me a little bit because this would have really been something if Christy Doran would have done some overdubs on the guitar, because the traditional Chinese instrument does not play chords. So when Christy Doran is playing like a guitar solo, there's not a lot backing him up. She'll be playing maybe like an individual line on the Chinese instrument, but not like a backing chord. And again, I think this was recorded in, I'm not sure if this is the one, it doesn't say. A lot of his recordings, I noticed, are recorded in a single day in the studio, which may account for the lack of overdubs. It's basically go in, do it live. And again, on some of the tracks, he's using a little bit of a looper thing or like a sustain thing on the guitar. So he's playing over himself. And you could hear that there's a lot more potential there if he would have used the overdubbing potential of the studio. But even without that, this is a really interesting, probably one of my favorite things he's done. Nice combination of instruments, but like I said, you have to be in love with the with the sound of the Chinese instruments. And most of what he's done recently has been this rock band thing of his. He puts out a lot of albums, which is incredible considering he's got this whole teaching career thing going on. So this is nice to see him doing something like this, and I hope he continues to do things along those lines. Something else I picked up. The Cold Blue, this is something that came out in vinyl that I tried to get back in the day in the early 1980s when this came out on vinyl. In the days before the internet, this is a label called Cold Blue. It's out of California, but their stuff was never available in stores, and you could only get it by mail order. By the time I found out about this album, I can recall it was about 1986 or 87. I think it originally came out in 1984. It's a multi-artist compilation. Most of the artists I am not familiar with, literally until 2 days ago when I got this. And I've got a whole new batch of artists to discover because there's a lot of stuff on here I love. But this originally came out on vinyl only, just 84, just a little bit before the CD age. By the time I found out about it, I wanted to get it because it's got a Harold Budd track. Harold Budd and Eugene Bowen together. It's only a 5-minute track, but it's really good, and I'm a real completist when it comes to Budd especially. Turns out it's a really good track. It's 4.5 minutes long, something like that. But I really, really wanted to get this on vinyl. And I can recall trying to trace it down through mail order companies back around 87 or so and not being able to. And I think the Cold Blue label actually went out of existence for a few years. And I remember thinking, well, I'll never get that one track. I really, really wanted it specifically for that one track. But there's a lot of new music composers on it. And that's what it is. This is for people that like avant-garde music. It's primarily an avant-garde label. I don't even know if it's things that maybe a couple of the artists could fall into the category of new music, edging along the ideas of new classical music, but they compose for treated pianos and things like that. But I discovered a whole lot of new artists from this that I'm really digging. That music's a little loud on my end, and I don't know how much the microphone's picking it up, and I don't have my remote to do anything about it. So Cold Blue all of a sudden just came back into existence, entered the CD age, and I discovered that the sampler that I wanted back in 1984 has all of a sudden, at least it was a few years ago, has come back into print. So I was actually able to get the Harold Budd track that I wanted on CD. This is exactly the album that was released on vinyl. There's one additional track on it, like another 5 or 6 minute track that they added onto it. But other than that, it's the exact same sampler that came out with the Harold Budd track I was looking for. And like I said, there's a whole batch of new artists on here. All of the pieces are really short. But I actually went onto their website, which is coldbluemusic.com. And they have all the artists that are on here, they have complete solo albums with sound samples. And I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Right off the bat, I think the first 6 or 7 albums I sampled, I wanted them all. They're that good. Some of the stuff is really out there. Some of the stuff is quiet and pretty in an avant-garde way, if that makes any sense. So I'm kind of enjoying that, and glad to finally have this one Harold Budd track that I've been hunting down since 1987 or so. I'm going to go out of frame for a second because I found the remote. Okay. There was one very loud track on, and I don't know how much that's being picked up. The other thing I listened to, that isn't a new acquisition of mine. And I don't know, people in the VC, if anybody else does this, it would be people in the VC, not everybody. But when I get in the mood to hear an artist, any individual artist, generally for me, one album isn't enough. Now, for some people, they only need to hear one song or one piece of music. For me, whenever I am interested in hearing an artist, I get the desire to hear an artist. It's always at least a full album. Generally, it's more like 3 or 4 or 5 albums, and I'll go on a listening spree and I want to hear, 3-4 hours of them before I have any desire to move on to the next thing. And sometimes I've collected or purchased intentional box sets by somebody who's new to me, simply because instead of buying one album and just having one album by this person and down the road somewhere picking up more, I figured if I like this artist, I'm going to want more by them. Why don't I buy something that has more than one album's worth of material to start with? Now, sometimes that bites you in the ass. Generally, how I work it is, I've either heard sound samples, in this case I didn't, in the one I'm about to show you, or I read about the artist and they seemed interesting enough to me that I would probably want to hear more than one CD by them, one album. Or, well, then I'll kind of go out looking for things that may be good bargains in terms of something having more than one CD, so if I really don't know an artist, I don't know if I'm going to lay out $25 to $30 for a 2 CD set. But in this case, I have been reading about this classical composer from Spain, from one of the areas in Spain, or someplace by Spain, who born in 1893, passed away in 1987. Federico Mompau, and like most composers, he wrote orchestral works, but he wrote a whole bunch of solo piano works. And I don't know how I came across him. Something was suggested by something I was reading online. I've always been looking for pianists in the classical world that are considered to be very low key, kind of like that, like the Harold Budd of the classical world. And so far, the closest I've come is somebody like. Well, I'm not talking about modern. There's a lot of modern classical people that may fit that mold, but going back, to previous generations, maybe an earlier period. Maybe like a Satie or Debussy would sometimes fall in that category. And I was reading this guy, Federico Mompau from Spain, falling in to that Satie, Debussy. People that like those guys would like this. It's even more low-key, supposedly. And I was reading about him and came across this 4 CD box set that was slightly more than a single disc. So it's got four CDs in envelopes like this. I bought it a number of years ago, and it has a nice booklet in it. And it's it's not. It probably would put some people to sleep. It won't put me to sleep. But it's very low key. Not all pretty though. It's got those kind of dark cluster chords that you hear in classical music. And yeah, there's some dynamics there, but a lot of it's low key. And a lot of it is very non-technical. Which it's not one of these things that you have to be the highest level of classical virtuoso to play. And the thing that made me buy, I have one other album of Mompau's music. I don't have yet any of his things that he's written for orchestras or for anything but solo piano. But this is 4 discs, and I want to say it's over 4.5 hours of music. It's almost everything that he recorded that he ever wrote for solo piano. And the thing that really made me go for this, besides the fact that it's 4 discs, so it's a lot of music, and the price was really good, was the fact that this is a rare instance of Mom Pow recording his own music. So this was recorded in 1974, specifically, I guess, for a series of albums of his solo piano music. And there's a lot of scholars and people that know a lot more about him that say that they actually prefer some of the other classical pianists' recordings of these pieces, even though they come close to this. But for me, I'm much more of a sucker of the guy that wrote it. If I can hear a recording of the composer playing his own music, I tend to go toward that a lot more, even though the one thing I will say about this is the sound quality isn't as great as a lot of classical solo piano discs that I have. And that's even mentioned in the reviews. The recording technique wasn't the greatest. It's not the best sounding piano thing you've ever heard. It's not distorted, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the greatest sound. And people have mentioned that, and for that reason alone, sometimes they'll recommend buying a solo piano CD of Mom Pow's music by another pianist. But it sounds good enough. Maybe if this were an orchestra and it was poorly recorded, that would be different, because there would be entire instruments that you might not hear, and string sections or horns or oboes or something like that you might not hear if it were poorly recorded. More than likely, somebody just set up a few microphones in the room and recorded the piano, and I don't think you would ever put it on and say, oh, that sounds bad. It maybe doesn't have the depth of a lot of solo piano recordings that would be made, say, after this point, and this was 74. The incredible thing is he was 81 years old when he recorded this entire series of piano pieces. And sometimes, and like I said, I don't know if it's only the people in the VC that might get this. Sometimes I just look at my shelves and where I keep some of my music, and I look at things, and I suddenly get the desire to just jump all in and do an entire box set of something, like instead of, you're looking up and down, you see your single, say, oh, that would be nice to listen to, that one would be nice to listen to, whatever. And then sometimes I'm just in the mood to I want to just dive right in, and I do that with this particular set of 4 CDs, probably more than any other one that I have that I could think of. There's something about this particular package, I guess because it was all recorded at one time in the same group of sessions by the composer, it's all together in a box, that this is the one that I look at the most that says, you know what, I'm just going to pull this thing off and I'm going to play all 4 discs, and 4.5 to 5 hours later, is when it's done. And I get that way with other box sets that I have too. Sometimes I'm just in the mood to submerge myself for an incredibly long period of time in one thing, in one mode. And yeah, after an hour or so of just solo piano, you could get bored of it. But it's almost like a mindset, like you have to want to really submerge yourself into this. And when I play it, I generally play it in my computer. So I don't even know where one CD ends and the other begins. I just put all 4 CDs in a playlist. So it just plays all 4 consecutively until the whole set is done. So I'm not even aware of, I'm on CD 2 or CD 3 or CD 1. I have no idea. For some reason, ever since I got this box set years ago, maybe 10 years or more ago, I've been doing that with this box set. Every once in a while, I just get in this mood just to immerse myself in this kind of it creates a world, which is what my favorite music always does. Most of it is very low key, not rhythmic, so you're not following a rhythm, so you're just listening to it. Maybe for a lot of people it would be a good background for reading or something. But, again, out of all the new ones that I got that I've been listening to, this one just came off the shelf again, and I've been doing this marathon session with listening to this again. So an interesting composer. I'm definitely going to be reading up more on him, because I put his music in there. It's even a little more low-key than a lot of the Eric Satie stuff and Claude Debussy stuff. Different harmonic structures, I guess, but he definitely uses a lot of those, at times, dense classical chords, and other times it's really quite sparse, in a way that I can't think of another classical composer of this era, an earlier period, that did stuff this sparse, really. And I really dig it. And I'm in the mode of listening to it again. So, I didn't mean to go that long, and I say that in almost all my videos. So I just thought I would do this one, what I've been listening to, in lieu of doing an hour-and-a-half video. But this has been quite long anyway, so thank you for indulging me. And if I don't come up with something, well, I'll be talking about my music next. I finished my next album 5.5 years after my last one. So I'm still in the stages of... It's endless. It's mixing, and every time I have to mix a track again, I have to burn a CD and listen to it, and I find out something is too loud or too low in the mix, and I have to go mix it again, and I burn another CD, and I have to do that with 8 tracks. And then there's not just the mix, there's the equalization, which is another problem, because I'm really having trouble not deciding, but trying to figure out whether there's too much or too little bass in these pieces. In terms of the bass end of it, depending on what stereo I play it on, I get completely different results. I do have a very inexpensive surround sound system, but I don't know if... I think it's very odd the way it highlights certain pitches and certain instruments, because I'll take that same CD that I burned and played in my car, which is a pretty decent system, and the car one was more of my deciding factor for how I mixed and EQ'd something for my last album. I didn't even have the surround system then, and I heard something on my surround system that sounded good. I brought that same burned copy of the CD out to my car, and one of the instrument parts was way too loud listening to it in my car stereo, even though it sounded fine in the surround sound. So I'm going back and forth, and I'm doing mixes, and I'm going back to previous... I'm just getting so lost in this. This is the worst part of this whole thing that should have been done weeks ago. And I even took a week off, not intending. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And I'm like, this is crazy. And over 5 years, I've got something else to release, and I'm not releasing it because I'm so sick of these EQ problems and these mixing problems. And so I just got back to it today, but I literally spent an entire week of not wanting to deal with it. And I'm just so close, so close to being done. So, that may be the next thing I talk about. And, if it takes more than a week to get that final version done, then I'll just come on and talk about what I've been listening to since. So that's it. Almost 40 minutes, way too long. Thanks. Hope everybody's doing well. And I'll be back soon, and I'll see you on your videos.